Yeah. I am very much of the industry. I absolutely love landscaping. I love hard landscaping and stone. I just live and die stone. I was also the founder of the Association of Professional Landscapers in 1995. I had 17 years on committee and council with Barley before then. So in 1978 I started getting involved with the industry in a heavyweight way. Now, although these are called my top 20 hard landscaping tips, I suppose you could call them also keeping out of trouble. And so if we go with these, now I have the honour of being an expert witness in landscape projects, mainly dealing with hard. I deal with over 100 court cases a year, believe it or not. It's such a pity to see so many jobs going bad because of lack of care. And I think if I start off with the first one by saying survey the whole site as a whole, including beyond the boundaries. So many designers and specifiers only look at the garden they're working in and not look at the whole site and take in the whole picture. The terrain, the trees, soil type, possible flooding. There's a lot more flooding issues coming now because obviously with the amount of new builds going on, a lot of ground is being disturbed, a lot of the SUD's compliant issues going on with local authorities and building roads and so on. There's a lot of disruption, certainly within towns and villages, a lot of disruption in the land, the global area around your site that you're dealing with. So potential problems with tree roots, and I don't just mean tree roots in existing trees. I really do recommend that you actually look back and do a Google Earth search of any project that you're working on. Every 2 years or so there's a new Google Earth photograph of the site, and it's fascinating to actually go back and look at 2020, 2018, 2016 or so, as to how many changes there are, not just in the garden that you're working on, but in the area around the site. It makes a big difference. So a lot of trees have been removed, and obviously they're causing a lot of problems with ground heave at the moment and saturation. Ensure your quotation terms and conditions are signed by both customers and contractors. It is absolutely astonishing how many contractors don't get signed contracts, and they don't get their customer to sign the contract. I don't know quite why this is, but numerically there's an awful lot of customers contracts that are not signed, and they're totally useless. No matter how many words you put in them, they totally have no value. This is why I've been a great fan of the CDM regulations. I think it's the most fantastic document ever for landscape contractors, because it actually is a guide that and a regulation that the customer must understand, and they have to buy into it, because as you know, the customer or the client is responsible for health and safety on site, and they only relinquish that once the designer gets involved, and then relinquish it again when the contractor gets involved. So anytime the client doesn't want to get involved with CDM regulations, then they can carry the can themselves, and they never do. They always want to obviously hand it over to you, hand it over to the professionals. Ensure your terms and conditions include both preliminary cost and variation orders, as a mean of preserving your profits and controlling project finances. A lot of contractors don't show preliminaries or prelims in their prices. Now, prelims are a whole range of things, but to those who are not au fait with prelims, they include everything, including machinery on site, getting on site, site security, site safety, site protection, all of the site issues that can cost maybe 400, 500, £1,000 a week ongoing. So if you've got a 4-week project and you put in your prelims there that you've got a 4-week project planned, if with weather like this now, you're still paying that £1,000 a week for the cost of the machinery and so on to be on site, and that's all coming out of your pocket. And it shouldn't do. It should be in your preliminaries, your prelims, that state clearly that that you're on site only for a certain amount of time. Variation orders, so many people don't use variation orders properly. We all know about email exchanges and saying, okay, you want to add a bit on your patio, I've got an email to cover myself. That doesn't cover yourself. You do need a proper variation order. And variation orders are very, very valuable as far as I'm concerned, because again, it keeps the client aware of what they're spending and any alterations they make. They can be plus or minus, of course. They decide they're going to remove a fence or something, take it out of the project. Then that's a minus on your variation order for a minus. But in the main, they usually do things with, if you like, extras. What you would call extras, I would call variation orders, and that protects you. Maintain a strict record of daily procedure. I know a lot of people do that as a matter of course. A lot of people don't. I recommend that you in fact take photographs every day, including and especially foundations and depth of foundations, things that you're going to bury and then no longer visible. You can actually prove on a day-by-day basis what you're doing, including putting down membranes and irrigation systems, lighting systems, cables, conduits. Everything that goes in the ground should be photographed and recorded, because you can't see it afterwards. And you then can't go back and say, yes, I did do it. You can actually prove that you did it. Create a products library of all materials. Now, I called it a products library. You can probably get your own phrase for that. But anything that comes to site, as a contractor, I would actually get signed off by the customer. So I get paving, I get it wet and dry. So the customer would initial it with a waterproof pen to say, yeah, I accept that. So the architect, the designer, the client and the contractor all initial the products that you're going to be putting in on site, and so that they can't then turn around and say in 6 months time, I didn't like that, it's changed colour, whatever. You've shown them, they've agreed it, they've signed for it. And of course what this does is that it means that it takes that equation out of any future complaint, because the customer knows they've agreed it, but they can't say they didn't agree. If they do disagree, then they can pay for it to be taken up and redone. But it avoids any future problems. I'm not sure where I've got it on this particular slide or not, but I will just say it now. Do please keep a record, keep any paperwork that comes with a product, a pack of paving, a pack of bricks, whatever, keep any documents that come with it and store them for at least 6 years, because you're obliged to look after and maintain that, not maintain that site, be responsible for that site for 6 years under the Consumer Credit Act and the Consumer Protection Acts and so on. So if you can prove that you've done, what you said, what the advice leaflet said, you can prove that you've done that 6 years ago. Even if products change and methods change, recommendations change, you're actually bulletproof, because you can prove you did what you're supposed to do at that time. Ensure your quotation has a break clause and sunset clauses. Break clauses are really for when things get like this sort of weather, and you can say, look, I do advise Mr. Customer that we really ought to lay off the ground for a couple of months. It's not going to do you any good, it's not going to do the ground any good, the project will fail, because we're reconstituting the ground now into slime, into slurry. We can't work in these situations. You do need to have a break clause in your terms and conditions. Sunset clauses, at the end of every job, or every part of a job, you've got a larger project, you need practical substantial completion. That's a phrase you need to keep in mind. There's no such thing as a finished landscape job. There's never a 100% finished landscape job, but practical substantial completion covers it. So that means that at any given time, once you've got that signed off, practical substantial completion, you're not responsible over long drawn out periods for maintaining the project. I'll give you a little, for example, if you were designing and building a garden that required, say, bulb planting in the autumn, and you finished in the spring, unless you get that phase signed off, you technically remain responsible for the site. So when you return in November, December to do the bulb planting, and it's full of weeds because it's not been maintained, you're liable. You've then got to pick up and sort out the site to make it fit for purpose to put in your plants, to put in the bulbs. So you follow my logic. You need to have that sunset clause, so you sign off if you have a project that is going to need a break clause. Ensure your chairs are going on to the hard landscaping side now. I have so many problems with the mismatching of sub-bases and jointing materials, permeable bases and impermeable bases. I'm not going to go into the benefits of either because we really haven't got time, but please make sure that if you're going to use an impermeable laying bed, that you use an impermeable grout. Don't mix and match those products, because otherwise you can have all sorts of problems. If the client says, oh, I changed my mind, I want to have a different colour, I rather like that brushing effect, I want the impermeable, you can't change that. That must all be laid out so that the customer understands. You can't just chop and change products. And I give the analogy of this one for the customer. If they had a new bathroom fitted and the walls have been rendered and plastered, they know they got 28 days between finishing the plastering and putting on the wallpaper or the tiles. They know that, and they don't quibble, they don't argue. And so this is the same thing. If you're using a series of products, you've got a paving that's got certain porosity, you've got your laying bed which may be porous, may not be porous. Make sure that you match all of those ingredients. Ensure the laying bed's fully screeded. Now, so many sites that I've seen have to go and sort out, and not just the dot and dab method, the old dot and dab method, but they've got big voids in the actual laying bed. And so with these quite thin products, you're going to get moisture going down through, lying in the void, impermeable bed. They just lie and they just get filled with moisture, also moisture being drawn from underneath. So you've got these puddles of water that you can't see, but as soon as you get a reasonable frost, you'll start to pop all the slabs. So you can have a lovely job, superb job, it looks fantastic, all the levels and falls are right, everything looks perfect, but as soon as you get a bit of cold weather, they will start popping. If you're using heavy or large slabs, consider the weights involved when planning your scheme. If weight's too much for one person, it's one of these things about looking ahead. It's almost doing your RAMs. You've got to look at your RAMs, the risk assessments and method statements, and decide whether it's going to be a heavyweight job, but you need 2 or more persons to actually handle the paving. I think the grabos are great. All these modern techniques are great, but it's still your back, and if you're trying to pick a heavyweight slab up, it's your back that's going to be suffering. Ensure the backs of the slabs, especially porcelain, are fully coated. Well, we all know about that, don't we? We all know how it should be done, but it's amazing how many jobs are not laid properly. There's totally no slurry whatsoever, no bonding agent whatsoever on the back of the slabs, and you can walk along and play a tune with them. Now I have what I call an audio test I do, and it literally is a wooden broomstick. I can walk along and I can tap those slabs. I wear thin sole shoes. I can feel the vibrations through the shoes. I can hear the sound, and you know what a hollow sounding slab sounds like. But in some project I go on, I could play a tune on them. I could do a Russ Conway walking up and down playing a tune on them, because they're all hollow underneath. There's no bonding whatsoever. Ensure your cutting equipment is sharp. What is it with people? What is it with customers? If you have a project done indoors, you have your conservatory tiled, paved, and it's going to be absolute perfection, because you're using probably 0 joints, and the edges all look fantastic. But directly you go outside, we're working in very harsh conditions. We're working in the wet, we're working in the heat, we're working in let's say, very difficult situations, and yet the customer expects us to have the same perfection that you can get working in the conservatory. And they look for exactly the same detail, and they do not like to see any slightest chip caused by a dry cutting or even a blunt saw, and they want to condemn the whole job. People get down their hands and knees with a magnifying glass trying to find defects. Outside, I've actually seen them do it. But they get these close-up cameras and they're zooming in on the microscopic detail, and they're complaining about it. It's incredible. Wear safety gear at all times, especially when cutting. Now that's a pretty obvious one, but it's also a very good one when you're. It's something about being seen to be safe, being seen to work sensibly rather than slovenly, the clients all really do respect that. If you've got the right gear on and you're using the right equipment, the whole ambience of the site is raised. Beware the requirements of BS 5385, which is tiling, and 7533. You know the new 7533 that came out last year, 101. 102 should be out next year. To my mind, it's brilliant to have that, because I first started as expert witness about mid-90s, so around about 30 years. I was involved with the old BS 7533, which is around about 1990. I was involved with the group which was called the Traditional Paving Development Group, based at the University of West of England, working with marshals and CED, working on the old BS 7533, which was for pavements. And of course, although it was very much what we were doing in gardens until now, till 101 came out last year, there was never a proper BS for landscape projects. We now have that, which is brilliant. But BS 5385 for tiling, tiling is between 6 and 16 mil. And the BS is totally different. The actual, all the methods are different, the laying methods are different. I don't want to go into that, but say they are very different. And basically they require a very, very impermeable bed and a very, very dry bed. You cannot lay to BS 5385 with any moisture content at all. This is for internal use. You'd actually, no tiler would actually lay a tile floor until they actually put a hydrometer on it to make sure there's no moisture whatsoever in the base. So because some of the products that we use, and I was on a site last Saturday over in Essex, where there's some Indian porcelain, and it actually had on the pack 20 mil, that had R11 slip rating and everything else on there, but it also said tiles. And this is where it's very difficult, and why you need to keep these documents that you get from that you collect as part of your working day, because in fact you should not lay, they're not tiles and they shouldn't be laid as tiles. Tiles begin at 18 mil and above. So sorry, paving begins 18 mil and above. So 7533 is for 18 mil and above. There we go. Check likely temperatures before laying. Now again, this is an issue. I was in Poole on Sunday. I do work 7 days a week. In Poole on Sunday, the project had, the client was incredibly fussy, and because the contractor had laid installed the grouting on a hot day, you had some micro cracking going on. Micro cracking, I emphasise micro cracking, because I'd used it in the wrong temperature, the wrong conditions. And of course anybody can go back and check the temperatures on a given day in any given site. And this particular customer, he was a very bolshy fellow, property developer, and so he basically tried to get me to condemn the whole site, when the contractor's done a really good job and just jumped the gun a bit, and just basically grouted just too early. You know, you're responsible for the job. It's entirely up to you to take control of it. Control your customers. Let's go back to the analogy of the new bathroom being built. They would not allow you to tile too early. So why should they indoors? So why should they allow you to tile too early, to work too early outdoors? The same with the 21 days for laying the slabs. And obviously, if you've got a really nice hot day or a hot week or whatever, that would be a bit different. But you've got to make sure the laying bed is fully dried out, and 21 days is the recommended time. Otherwise you're going to get discoloration as well. If you get too much moisture as you're brushing the grout in, moisture comes up from underneath and you get discoloration actually within the grout. So even if you've got a really good grout like Future-Pave, you just get this variation which really winds some customers up. There's nothing you can do about it apart from taking it out and starting again. A lot of projects recently, and this is something I've always done, and I've become aware that it needs to be said. When a lot of people, I don't know why, they want to put concrete edges, concrete blocks as an external edge around porcelain patios. apart from mixing a horrible concrete block, cheap as chips, to a nice product, it's a detail, and detailing the customers seem to like. Now, if you're going to put that detail on the outside, I'm now talking about the edging of the border around the paved project. Ensure that the base and laying bed are extended out beyond the paving, so you don't finish the paving at a given point, extend it out by another 220 or whatever wide your detail is going to be. Extrude that out, and I link the two areas together, either brick ties. I've always used steel mesh. I put a steel mesh down so it extends out beyond the patio area. I can then put any detailing on, finish that off. It's all locked together as one monolith. Then just go along and trim off the excess mesh on the end after you've finished. I use the mesh. I prefer mesh, but the old butterfly ties are good if you wanted to use those. If you forget to put the mesh in, just use butterfly ties. Link the two together, otherwise you get this separation. You've got one that's been fully grouted, and you can't fully grout the old concrete blocks or the small detail because it just looks a complete mess, as you know. You've got some cementitious grout going on top of a cement block, and you just get a mess. So you can't really fully point those, and they separate as a ribbon. Irrigation systems, another project I've got not too far from here. The paved area had been finished, but the lawn had been fully drained and got an irrigation system in as well. So there's a lot of water going onto the ground in the lawn, and it was then going underground and going off and coming back toward the house and coming back toward the patio. And being on clay ground, of course, the contractor had actually created his own problem, because by laying the irrigation system and the underlawn drainage system and direct it toward the patio, he caused a lot of ground heave. Because the clay heaved and just ripped the patio up. And it was a dreadful mess. So especially on clay soils, just be aware you want to get moisture away from the ground. Don't direct it towards your paving. As I said earlier I thought maybe I'd put that one in there, retaining instructions and documents that come for at least 6 years. These products keep changing all the time. I have a job to keep up with them. And I'm delighted to find this morning that, and I really meant that too, somebody being honest about the industry. I thought that was excellent. And somebody digging the hills and then not supplying the wrong products just to make money. Another thing that you might not realise, but when you're protecting your area from heavy rainfall and ensure the sheeting cannot pond in one area, I've seen it again many times. You get a perfect full 1 to 60, 1 to 70 across, and you've got a nice edging detail, everything's all set, paving's all finished, and it's going to start to rain. The contractor will put a nice big sheet over it, tarpaulins over the paving, and that heavy rain keep beating down, and it's amazing how many tons of water you can get on a decent sized patio, and they're pushing the ground down, pushing the whole thing down. So when you take the sheets off, you've got a micro pond where the sheets have weighted down on the patio, and you wonder why when you had a perfect fall you suddenly got a big pond. It's not obvious, but it's only obvious when somebody like me comes along afterwards and sees the damage that's been done by somebody exercising care. It's much better that you leave the sheets off rather than put them on and create a problem for yourself. And there's the best one. Always buy the best quality products. Well, that really says it all, doesn't it? It can be a false economy, and one thing just off the side here, I really do recommend you don't allow the customer to go and buy their own product. The biggest nightmare of all for contractors when they say, "Oh, I bought the paving. I've found some online, I've got mine to get it cheaper." I'm sure that you all recognise that and see a few smiling faces there. It's just something I do seriously recommend do not do. And this brings us back to CDM. Provided that you're working under CDM, that doesn't arise. It causes so many problems for the contractor. Now I've got over there on the table, help yourself to a copy. It's a site logistics and site survey template do recommend that you use it. Look at all the words on that. Now, I've always sent one of those to my customer before I do the survey, because it ties the customer into what you need to know. If you look at that, read it through, you can copy it off as much as you like. You put your own name on it, I don't care. I'd rather you used it than copyright it. And finally, everybody here today who wants to are invited to give me your email addresses, and we will give you access to the Landscape Library for 3 months to show you what's in there. There's about 450 articles, books, essays, all sorts, mainly written by myself, but also Gareth Wilson and Sam Hassel and others. So you're welcome to that. That's just for this particular group, so thank you for coming today. Any questions? Any questions? I will keep going all day, believe you me.
Variations, you get them signed up by the time as well?
Oh yes, yeah, variation orders. Some companies actually have variation books. Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying you should go to that expense, but a variation form that's got variation on the top and a variation order number, and then you tie in on the top there you've got the contract, name and address of the client and everything else. So it's just on that, you just get them to sign to say, yeah, I accept that there's a variation that they want. The problems come, as you know, if you have a situation where you've finished one particular job and they want an extension to it, can you add another 6 foot on the patio, please? It's never ever that simple, because you've got to then pick up on the same falls and so on. It's never ever that easy. And also, of course, you've only got a small amount of material to bring in. It might only be another 20 slabs, so you're not going to buy them at the same rate as you bought your initial lot. You've got all the on costs of transport, you've got all the on costs of extra work and so on. So it's not, you can't have it a metre rate for the paving, because it's much more expensive. You want to buy one turf and lay one turf, it'll cost you £100, and that's the sort of logic you've got to have. And you just explain that to the customer. You can have this, but it's going to cost you X amount, and this is the reason why. Extra costs, extra costs, extra costs, and then you get that signed off. So at the end of the job, you don't suddenly say, oh, this is the extras. No, here is all the variations that you signed for. You don't get any arguments, you don't get any quibbles. Any more questions?
I had one about preliminaries.
Preliminaries, yes, prelims.
So,
yep.
So if you identify an ideal percentage that we should keep in mind, I know it's very site specific, but when sort of starting thinking about costs before we get out to quote, have you identified it should be like 10% of overall cost or 15%?
I don't like percentages. I'll tell you that now. I don't like percentages on anything. I don't like percentages for design fees. I don't like percentages for products, because in the back of the client's mind, they recognise that if you are charging percentages, you're going to be choosing the most expensive. So they would rather have a rate that they could understand. The percentages, the higher the price, the higher the percentage. And it's often not justified, or under-justified, or over-justified. But if you've got preliminaries and you say you've got, as I said, the ones that you can identify would be the on-site costs, which would include, obviously, setting up site, site protection, any machinery coming in, toilets coming in. Toilet hire is about £44 a week. Doesn't sound a lot, but by the time you extrapolate that over a project, you suddenly find you're spending many hundreds of pounds on that toilet. But they're all going to be paid for, and they're all paid for under prelims, and they're shown as a separate figure. And they can be shown as a weekly figure as prelims. Tracking across grass. My son runs a firm called Aaron Landscapes, and he has a very, very good system with his prelims, because he also has a lot of ground boards. He has these 30-ton ground boards. Cost him a lot of money when he bought them, the big thick rubber ones. They can take 30 tons weight. Now, he's made so much money on those ground boards because he rents them each time on a job, and they're shown as part of the prelims. You can't add them into the cost of the job, because it would then, when you put it on, you can't put it on labour, you can't put it on materials, you put it in your prelims. So prelims, you've got 20 lengths of rubber matting, 30-ton matting, X number of pounds a week, and that goes in as part of the prelims. This is all in the landscape library. Any more? Any more? No?
Can I ask a question about the paving versus tiling and the building codes that you mentioned?
Yes.
Because I know the example that you brought up was that there's a supply of paving, but it was identified as tiling.
Yeah.
Is that something that should be sort of highlighted to the supplier then if that's been given to us as
I can't highlight it because by the time I come in, I'm looking at advising a court. I am the eyes and ears of the judge, is the way it's called.
Yeah.
So I have to advise the judge on the difference. So I have to explain in writing the difference between the two. And so I have to be very graphically very clear about what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm so pleased that the BSs have come in. But the difference between the two, they're radically different, apart from different products that you're going to be using, different compounds, as it were. Tiling is also, under BS, is also for vertical walls.
Yeah.
So you can have that situation. You can't, if you wanted to pave a wall, you'd have to pave it under BS 5385. Because you've got the different materials, different products.
Is that something that should be highlighted with the supplier from us if it's...
I don't know. I brought that up just now, and I think probably that it will be brought up more. It's just something which is not. It doesn't become a problem until you wind up in court. Let's put it that way. Until it's too late.
Yeah.
And as architects too, you should be perhaps having a look at that. Probably already have. I don't know. Part of your training? No. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I do a lot.